And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Happy New Year! I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on the first day of 2025, January 1st. It's a Wednesday, and certainly looking at the extensive ice we have across the far north along the Beaufort Sea, down along the Chukchi Sea coastline. There are a few polynyas, more notably there near and west of Point Lay. And then as we go south through the Bering Strait, we also find a few here between Golovin on over toward Shaktoolik, and then also along the lower Yukon coastline. But one thing of note, with winds being east-northeasterly, this ice will continue to build because there's going to be a shot of Arctic air come across the interior through the course of the weekend with east-northeasterly flow. So this ice may have a tendency to want to push a little further westward as we go through the next 3-4 days. And looking at the weather map, there's not any really substantial low that's going to impact the mainland or Gulf Coast panhandle area for a change. Relatively quiet still. There is a low down in the North Pacific later tonight, early on Thursday morning. More notable low, 962 low southwest of the Aleutians. This front, though, will have some gale force winds with it as it lifts northward across the central and western Aleutians as we get into Thursday afternoon, Thursday night. The other low back here toward the North Pacific will send a front up toward the southern panhandle. As it comes northwestward, though, it just kind of weakens to a trough. More notably, high pressure out over the central Arctic Ocean and the ridge that extends into northwest Canada. This is the dominant weather feature. This is what's going to help push a batch of internal Arctic air from east to west across the mainland. And in some areas where you get those cold winds funnel through the valleys, the gaps there, you know, some bitter cold wind chills. Some of the air temperatures here in the east central interior will be down around 40 to 55 below zero. That's just the air temperature, no wind chill, as this will be a very cold air mass. And coming up, what that means is in the panhandle, northern panhandle, there are some cold weather advisories up here as you get up toward White Chilkoot Pass, Skagway, Haines for temperatures that are very cold. You have northerly flow, though, in the inner channels, 30 knots, waves 10, 11 feet, Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, east wind 20 knots, 8-foot waves, Dixon Entrance. For the outer coast, northeast to east winds 20, 25 knots, so there could be some gust, 40 knots there coming from off of Prince of Wales Island out there, coming in off of Dixon Entrance. And then north winds continue inner channels on Friday, 35 knots, Lynn Canal, 12-foot waves, 30 knots, Stevens Passage, 11-foot waves, 6-foot waves down here toward Dixon Entrance. And then for the outer coast, generally easterly winds around 20, 25 knots, so there could be gusts to 40 knots outside of the, coming outside there of the icy strait. And then looking here across the northwest areas of the Gulf Coast, initially variable winds off the Kenai, 10 knots, though off of Cape Suckling, 30-knot northeast winds, north winds 15 knots, Prince William Sound, northeast winds, middle lower Cook Inlet to 20 knots, 4 or 5-foot waves. With that Arctic air passing westward and north of this region, where it's going to increase the northwest or northeasterly flow on Friday. 20 knot, at least 20 knot, maybe even a little higher winds here within Prince William Sound, 25 to 30 knot winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, and middle lower Cook Inlet will be looking at 30 knot northeast winds with waves of 8 to 9 feet. Northeast winds will be the rule around Kodiak Island, 25 knots on Thursday, 8-foot waves Shelikof Strait, 9-foot waves on the east side of Kodiak Island, and then winds more westerly around 20-25 knots there. North Pacific side waves 7 to 8 feet. 3 to 5 feet on the Bering side. For Friday, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots around Kodiak Island, 8 to 9 foot waves there again, Shelikof Strait. Easterly winds pick up 30, 35 knots there, especially down toward False Pass with waves of 10 to 11 feet. Now across the Aleutians, as I told you, that low pressure front lifting northward. Easterly winds 30 knots, the eastern Aleutians, Unalaska, Nikolsky. You get west of there, 35 to 40, even 45 knot gales, especially south of Kiska and Shimia, with waves breaching 20 feet there. And then by Friday, as that front pushes a little further north, Still easterly gales, 40 knots over the eastern Aleutians. Excuse me, and also easterly 40-knot gales there, Kiska towards Shimia. And along the southwest coast, northeast winds 25 knots out of Bristol Bay. 25-knot easterly offshore winds out of Norton Sound, lower Yukon Delta, and then easterly winds 25 to 30 knots, St. Matthew to St. Paul. That offshore flow will increase from the northeast on Friday as that Arctic air begins to spread westward. So the ice will have a tendency to want to shift westward, maybe a little southward. 30 knots out of Norton Sound along the lower Yukon Delta, and then northeast to easterly gales, 35 to 40 knots from the Pribilovs on up to St. Matthew. Through the Bering Strait, winds will increase easterly, 25 knots out of Kotzebue Sound, south of Point Hope. 35-knot easterly flow outside of Wainwright. There's going to be some stronger winds just on the north spine there of the Brooks Range into the North Slope. Easterly winds along the Beaufort Sea coast as high as 25 knots, Ukqiagvik. And then for Friday, Beaufort Sea coastline, east-northeast winds 20 knots, locally stronger off of Wainwright. And also, again, out of Norton Sound, we could see easterly winds of 25 knots. And then dropping down along the west side of Seward Peninsula, 20-knot winds out of Wales, Port Clarence, but 25 to 30-knot winds on the north side of St. Lawrence and extending back up into Norton Sound. So that's the way things are shaping up here as we go through Friday. And definitely a bit colder temperatures will be working their way westward across the interior to the west coast.